Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the AFBE Leadership Talk Program. This Leadership Talk Program aims to inspire effective leadership amongst everyone, in fact. And with me today is my co-host, Joy Ebuje. Thank you for joining me, Joy. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, please feel free to share in the chat section. If I miss it, Joy will definitely bring it up and we'll be able to ask our special guests. So thank you to everyone who's been able to join this evening. I hope we have a very exciting evening with our very, very special guest. For a moment, I almost said Professor Tunji. Maybe that should be the next step. But we have a very special guest, Tunji Akintoku. Tunji is a multi-award winning leader at LinkedIn, where he leads a multidisciplinary team for the UK and Ireland. He has held various leadership positions. I emphasize various, including one of the big four professional firms, PwC, and also a tech industry giant, Cisco. He is a non-executive director. He's a philanthropist and a keen art collector. And finally, Tunji is a father and I believe a great husband. Thank you, Tunji, for gracing the event today and joining us on this leadership talk show. Tunji, I think you're on mute.
I'm off mute, and thank you for the lovely introduction, Roy, and good evening, everybody. And I think you'll have to ask my wife and kids whether I'm a good person or not. So I think I am. I still get let back into the house every evening, so.
Well, I think you are, but either ways, it's a pleasure having you on this talk show, Tunji. We aim to, try and understand your leadership journey tonight, and we want to get that real inspiration from you, like they say, hear it from the horse's mouth. And I'm glad that you're here today. You're here to inspire us, and you're here to tell us your story. So let's start from the obvious. Tunji, tell us something about you that people don't know, before we start diving into your story.
That's a very good question, actually. And when I joined LinkedIn, it's the one thing they ask you. They tell you get asked, tell us something that's not on your LinkedIn profile. So what can I say? I would say that probably the one thing that's not on there is that I do have a little bit of a musical background, which we'll probably touch on. And I do, I used to, and this will be for people that are of a certain age, I used to co-own with a few other friends a record production company, and we used to do the production for Top of the Pops, for those of you that remember. So we had a studio on Wood Lane, which is not far from the BBC studios near Shepherd's Bush, and we used to do the edits for that. So that's probably something that's not on my LinkedIn profile.
Oh wow! So is it, you have a bass voice? Is it the bass voice you do, or what do you do?
No, it was a production company, so we would have people that were going to be going on Top of the Pops and things like that, and
okay.
then we would either remix or reproduce their music so that they could go on and either, as you probably, back in my day, you couldn't take a 7-inch single as a record itself and then sing the whole single on Top of the Pops. So you'd have to be able to cut it down, and they'd need to know how to sequence that. So that was what we did. So,
wow,
yeah.
That's interesting. Wow, that's fascinating to find out. That's good. So Tunji, tell us about your story. I think it will do justice if you told us more about, from your childhood, and all the way to basically the boardroom, the decisions you made. Tell us just a little bit intro about yourself in that respect.
Sure, and I'll probably, not that I always like to use slides, but it's probably an easier way to do that. So maybe if I share something, then it will give people a perspective of a bit of my background, and then also it will probably serve well for the questions. And I really want to make this quite quick in terms of background, because I think we should get to the meat of what this call should be about, which is around leadership journeys, etc. So hopefully everybody can see these slides, can they?
Yes, you can see it.
Excellent. So I guess by way of everybody has different mantras or things that they live by. And I think that when I look at my career, I think it goes through these phases of learning, earning, and returning. I'll probably have a caveat there and repeat, because you never stop really learning. You may stop earning at times, but the returning part is probably where I'd say that at this stage in my career, which is now a 30-year plus career, I'm kind of in more of the returning, which means that I'm looking to see what I can do more for others, and empower others to be able to succeed, especially the next generation, not just young people at the start of their careers, but certainly people that are in the midpoints of their careers. And I spend a lot of time mentoring and coaching and sponsoring to be able to do that. So that's probably where I'm kind of sitting at the moment. But the repeat means I still am always learning. You'll never stop that. So I'm a lifelong learner. So that's one thing I've accepted and embraced quite well.
I guess another section for the repeats could be you get to do it in other industries as well, because I think that is exactly what you're doing.
You can do. Yeah, you absolutely can. I would probably say that the majority of my career has been in tech. As much as maybe most people wouldn't realize, I graduated as a microelectronics engineer, and I spent the first 10 to 12 years of my career actually as a microelectronics engineer designing microprocessors. But then, I've moved much more over to the business side and probably spent the bulk of the rest of my career more in leadership over time, but mainly on the commercial side. But as we'll see as we go through, there's lots of other things I have done. And I'm a great believer that you shouldn't be a one-trick pony. You should try and have different, spokes to the wheel. It's probably a good way of putting it. If I think about my own children, I've only told them to do 4 things really. And I think if they do those, the learnings I've taken is that if they, as a given, as a Nigerian background and heritage, academics is almost like a given. But the other things I've tried to get my kids to do, which they're excelling at, is they both play musical instruments. They both have another language that they know. They're both relatively good French speakers, and they both do sport, both a team sport and an individual sport. And I think those skills they learn from those things will kind of set them up quite well for life generally. And that's something I've seen along the way that really helps, not just with leadership skills, but also with cognitive skills and communication and working with others. I think these are all general skills that you'll need in whatever career you take. So with that in mind, let me quickly flick through a little bit about who I am as a person, and then we'll get through to the meat. And do stop me along the way, Roy, in areas where you'd want a little bit more, you want to probe a bit more.
Yeah, that's good.
So this is me. Always start with a kid's photograph. That's me when I was about 2 years old, which is quite good. One of my favorite pictures. And that's my mother. My mother was actually an engineer. She was actually a textiles engineer. And that's my favorite picture of my mum, because that picture was taken exactly 1 month before I was born. And for those that have got good eyesight, her handbag is actually covering her bump, which is me. So I always show that picture, which I like. And that's my father. My father was a lawyer, barrister in this country back in the 60s. And and I share his name. So I'm quite proud of the fact that he's Ade Tunji and I'm Ade Tunji as well. So, and I pass that on to my kids. So my son has my name as his middle name. So we keep the Ade Tunji going. So what I'm going to probably try and do very quickly is tell you how the little boy in the top left-hand corner on a horse got to the grown man at the bottom on a horse. And hopefully it'll be a potted history of, I guess, my career to some extent and some of the things I've done along the way. So I'll first start in terms of how did I become an engineer or decide that that was what I was going to do. And I had a bit of a conundrum when I was younger. I was a very talented athlete when I was younger. This is a picture of me when I had hair. So unfortunately, it's all gone now, but there was a time when I did, and I still cherish those days. But actually, the reason why I got into being a computer engineer was because IBM came to my school when I was about 14 or 15. And the engineer that came in brought this PC in. This is the IBM PC, for those of you that know, I'm sure many of you do. And he explained that this computer that he put on the desk was going to replace a computer that was almost the size of the classroom that I was in. And I was fascinated. I thought, how are you going to reduce something that so big to something so small? And I asked him lots of questions and asked him how he had decided to go into it. And I thought, this is really interesting. I'm really fascinated. And I went ahead and chose my options. I chose sciences, and I decided I was going to be a computer engineer. A lot of my friends did computer science, actually, but I actually decided that I was going to do the opposite and actually do computer engineering. I was interested in the hardware and the firmware, as well as the software. I was quite lucky, more of a conventional, normal career, but slightly unconventional. I did A-levels, but I also did a BTEC in microelectronics before I went to university, because actually I'm a BTEC ambassador now, actually, and I'm a great believer that it gives you a lot of good vocational skills that you need. And in my days, doing pure and applied mathematics and physics was not going to teach me about microprocessors when I went to university. So I did a BTEC alongside my A-levels and then went on to university and studied the subjects I wanted to do. First, a microelectronics degree, and then a bit later I did a systems engineering degree. I've been quite lucky during my career, and when we talk about the learning part, I've gone back to business school twice in my career to learn more in different areas, to really expand my leadership skills. And I think that's something that, again, that just because you've done even if you get up to being a professor, it doesn't stop there. You can still continue to go back and learn new things. And the things I've studied at business school are things to broaden my knowledge. And I think that's probably one of the first lessons I'd say to everybody on this call, is to take the opportunity when it comes up to be able to broaden your knowledge, because as we'll find out, it's not always linear and in one direction.
I'll stop you there.
Sure.
So I'm interested to know why you had to go to business school twice. What was the drive? What's the main reason behind that, first of all? Was it that one school wasn't better than the other? Or was it you were at a stage in your career when there was an actual need for that knowledge?
Yeah, there was. And I think after I'd done my master's, I think, and that was still in a technical discipline, I was quite fortunate when I worked at Cisco. We were founded at Stanford. So it does afford you the opportunity to go back to school at a relatively cost-effective, if not sometimes free, because of they were found there. They're very, very generous in that respect. So I took advantage of that. But in terms of my career, there was nothing to do with one being better than the other. I mean, Wharton and Stanford, for those that know, are pretty decent, if not very good, Ivy League business schools. But I did different things. So at MBA in about 3 or 4 weeks, I did the EDP program, which you're handpicked to do that. You're on a course with around 25 to 30 chief execs from around the world. And then you're put into a simulation environment where you effectively run a company for the 2 weeks. Fantastic way to learn. You learn all the disciplines that you need to in an MBA, but then you get real life experience running a company. You're in groups, you can acquire different companies, you can take over your colleagues' companies and fire them if you want to, and take their assets. So they bring different economic environments, and it's brilliant, fantastic. So that was one of the things I wanted to do, because I was being trained at Cisco to become a general manager. So I needed to have a much broader skill set, not just technology, but also sales, marketing. I needed to understand more about finance and how you run a P&L. So there was a lot of reasons why that was a good thing to do at that point in time. And then with Stanford, I went there to learn about the principles of design thinking. And for those of you that, again, know, design thinking is about trying something and then iterating and then trying. You fail fast, and then you try different things. And I wanted to broaden my mindset around how I thought and innovated. There's a lot of discussion around whether you can teach innovation, but you can certainly give somebody a mindset to be able to use the principles to be more innovative in what they do. And to be honest, I've been to Duke, I've been to lots of different universities over the years in the US and here in the UK to broaden my skill sets in different areas. And even as we speak now, I'm about to sign up to do my executive coaching accreditations at Henley. So, it doesn't stop. You find new things to do to help develop and evolve what you're doing. So, you know, that's one thing I've always found. So not a case of whether one's better than the other, just different disciplines to broaden your knowledge and give you more opportunity.
So you mentioned something that you were training to be a general or at least a manager at Cisco, and that kind of prompted you. So was the decision before or after you knew you were being tapped on the shoulder to become a manager?
It was before. I think the potential was there. I'd shown that leadership, and I was asked. Within Cisco, we have something called an ADP, which is an accelerated development program over 2 years. Essentially, it's an internal MBA. You're handpicked to do that because it's a very expensive course to do internally. You do a bit of your training in the US, and I think at that time I'd been earmarked as being a future leader within the company. So I'm sure many people on the call have different types of development programs to provide people with the skills. You don't always learn them on the job. Some of them you do, but sometimes you need that learning in a more kind of, I guess, a campus environment with others, because you learn from others. So when you get handpicked as a top talent or potential top talent to do that, then they're broadening your knowledge so that you're going to be more useful to the company across a big business unit, and not just in a technical discipline or an area that, you know, those that know Cisco, it's a, you know, when I worked, there was a very broad company. We acquired a lot of different companies. We had everything from cybersecurity to video conferencing to software, to routers, switches, you know, lots of different things. But, you know, if you're going to run one of those businesses, you can't just understand the technology. You need to know how to manage the engineers. You need to know the profit and loss. You're dealing with, you know, understanding the price of silicon when you're making these things. So there's lots of other things that you need to have a mindset to be able to look more broadly than just understanding the technology. So yeah, it was something that was taken before, and it was something I wanted to do.
Okay. I think we can proceed. I've spent a lot of time on this slide.
It's all right, no problem. I guess this is just a snapshot of some of the companies I've worked, and as you can see, I've worked at a few, and my latest, I've been here 8 weeks now at LinkedIn, and I head up our marketing solutions group for the UK and Ireland, you know, a fast growing business. And again, if you saw, you know, the results from Microsoft, who's the parent company, you'd see that the area I work in was noted as one of the areas that's growing rapidly and doing extremely well. As I said, I've worked at Cisco. I've spent time selling product for Next. And for those of you that are probably not familiar, that's a picture of Steve Jobs. Many years ago, if you know the history already, his autobiography, he actually got kicked out of Apple by the board because he fell out with them. And when he fell out, he formed a company called Next, which was essentially a really cool Unix workstation for those of you that are very technical. And I kind of sold and marketed that and worked as a solutions engineer selling that. Yeah, easy story. Steve Jobs made up with Apple again. He went back and kissed up and made up with the board, went back, and then Next kind of then dissolved. And actually the technology, to be fair, became the precursor of what was used to really change the animation industry. And the likes of Pixar and others used a lot of the technology to be able to really start the process of rendering, and the whole thing from Toy Story to cars and all those types of things that were often, many of them were developed using a lot of the technology that that came out of Next. So pretty cool. And previous to that, I've worked abroad. Again, companies like NetFrame was a company that was started by the son of Carl Amdahl, who was one of the mainframe forefathers in the day when IBM were really big. So again, sold product for them, which is great. Lived in the US and worked for Novell out there. And then more recently, as I've said, I've been at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was there essentially looking after the technology and product and solutions group, which was a new part of the business that they were growing at the time. So fairly broad career over probably, as I said, around 30 plus years, done lots of different things. I've done a lot of things outside of work, and I've just listed just a couple of them here. So I'm sure those of you that have looked at my LinkedIn profile know that I'm a very keen art collector, have been for about 30 years. This is one of the artists that I actually support, and through my trust, we provide grants to do that. So we've launched this particular artist who's done well. If I look back over my career, I've run a modeling agency. We talked about the record company. And for those of you that have got a good palate for Nigerian food, I'm one of the investors in Chukwu's, the Nigerian tapas restaurant here in London. So got a few different things. I've angel invested in quite a few other businesses, predominantly Black businesses, to be honest, because that's what I want to do. And it's something I enjoy doing outside of my normal corporate life. I've been very lucky to work in lots of different countries and live in a lot of different countries. I've just listed a few here, from Russia to the US to Middle East and obviously Nigeria. So that's been great. And there's quite a few others. And that's, again, given me a great broad experience of leading different teams in different cultures. Because I think, again, as you grow your career, the ability to be able to lead teams in different areas, which often work very different. The culture of Africa is very different to the culture of the Middle East, and very different to the culture of, say, somewhere like Russia. You've got to be able to have the skills and the capability to flex your leadership style and understand how to lead in those environments if you're going to be successful. So that's one thing I've been very fortunate to have through my career, is that it's given me the opportunity to really stretch myself across different areas. And then as we talk about the returning part now, a lot of the last maybe 5-6 years has been spent more around everything from founding social enterprises right the way through to the charitable trust that I drive. And then I support a number of charities and not ones that I necessarily have a strong, it was interesting. I had a call today with somebody and they were saying, oh, you're a patron of the autism charity Casper. And they said, oh, do you have autistic children? And I said, no, but what I want to do as an ally is to raise awareness. And as a patron, that's a great way to be able to do that, is to ensure that, as when I used to do work experience, I always used to ensure that there were 1 or 2 young students that were on the spectrum that were brought into the workplace, so they got that opportunity. So, and the same with Able Child Africa, this is a place that I volunteer at every few years, where I go and do a little bit of teaching and support in the Kibera slums in Nairobi and in Kenya. If you know the Kibera slums, it's one of the biggest kind of slums there is in the world. There's a lovely school in there called Little Rock, which looks after disabled children. And as we know, in Africa, disability is still a bit of a taboo subject, and people have very different views around that. But there, it's a nice place to go and just help out and do the simple things like just help in a classroom, or even just help around the school. So something, when I get the chance to do, I do really find rewarding. And as we've spoken before, the non-exec work continues. I've sat on the boards of Teach First and Grant Thornton, and I'm still currently a non-exec director at England Athletics, and do quite a bit of work with UK athletics as well. So quite a varied career, and hopefully that gives you an idea of how my leadership journey started, and some of the things I've done, over the last, I guess, 30 odd years in different roles.
I think Tunji, one question that just keeps burning in my mind is, where do you have the time to do all of this?
Well, it's a good question, actually, Roy. And I think that if you're disciplined with your time and you have purpose, I spent a lot of time with my executive coach years ago, and we really probed into my value system, but also my purpose and what I wanted to really focus on. And we did lots of iterations of this. And, when we got to the fact of the things that I really cared about and I was passionate about, the one thing I've learned through my leadership journey is that it's not, it's a very commonly said term, but one that's absolutely important. There is no I in team. So I've always built good teams around what I do. If I look at the trust, there's trustees that do the work. I've founded it, I fund it, but actually there are a bunch of trustees that do the real work around that. When I was at the start, when we created Your Future, Your Ambition, again, there's a team of people that help run that, and they run that today. I'm not involved anymore with that. But, in the early days when we got it started, you surround yourself with really good people. And the whole idea is that you empower, and then you can then take a step back and go and do something else. So for me, I've always built good teams, gained followership, find people with a common who share a common passion or a goal that I do, and I bring them on the journey with me, and hopefully they grow as they go. And sometimes you leave them with it and say, fine, will you continue with that? And that's your growth, and I'll go and do something else. So it always looks on paper to be a lot of things, but in practice, I'm quite efficient with my time. I still do a lot of mentoring, and I just find ways to use my time effectively. If it's my lunch hour, it's not unusual for me to spend maybe half an hour of that having a mentoring session with someone while having my lunch if I'm working from home. And I just make things work. The things you're passionate about, you find time for, I find.
There's something you've said which is very key, and that is a testament to your leadership skills and testament to a good leader. And that is being able to build a team and empower that team, but also have the willpower to step back, which a lot of leaders don't have. You tell them to step back. No, they still have, almost micromanaging the whole system, and I think that's a very important skill.
It is, Roy. And I think, if you do any leadership course, no matter what flavor, you'll always say there are different types of leaders, and you have to work out what your natural leadership style is, but also you have to have a learned behavior of being able to pivot or change your leadership depending on who you're managing. And there will be absolutely people in your teams when you're growing a team that you will need to probably be some more supportive or more directive towards. But equally, there'll be people in your team where you just need to let them get on with it. They know what they're doing. You just need to lean in every now and then. And if they need something, they'll come to you, and you're just there to coach them. Often leaders have a one size fits all. That's their one style, and they use that on everybody. And if we go back to what I was saying before, when you're managing teams, and I looked after a team that was Middle East, Africa, and Russia, at the same time, they were all distinctively different in terms of the style of leadership, but the outcome was the same. So you've got to be able to pivot and know and recognize when you need to pivot your leadership style. It's something you can learn, but often leaders don't. They have a way of working. If it works for them, they believe they can cookie cutter that across any area. And they often wonder why they find it difficult to lead across the multicultural environments. And I think that's a skill that can be taught, but often leaders don't always necessarily pay enough attention to that.
Okay, I think we can lead into the next part of this discussion. So before I start taking questions from the audience, tell us about how you have navigated that path into leadership, because I think it's a very important aspect of this particular talk.
Sure, and I think with and this by the way is the leadership journey that you will take. And I think that often when we look at our career journey, we expect that journey to be fairly linear. So every time we decide to make that next move, we're looking to, if you're a senior associate, you're looking for your next move to become a manager. If it's a manager, you want to become a senior manager or a director or a vice president or an exec director, whatever that may be. And people often look at that. And the reality of it is that if you went and looked at my LinkedIn career, well, it looks quite linear, but it actually isn't. And what it doesn't really show very clearly, although it's not, it's factually there, is that in my career, I've had at least 2 to 3 lateral moves, some intended, some unintended, and at least 2 demotions. And again, some of them are intended, some of them are not intended. And I think that's one of the realities of what you do. With the planned ones, I always say that, you should think about your career maybe through 3 lenses: experience, exposure, and education. And when you're looking to make that next move, think about which of those buckets this is filling. It may fill all 3, which is great, but it may be filling one of them. It may be that I need to educate myself in an area, so therefore I'm going to need to take a move to do that. It may be that I'm going to stay in the role I am for a while because I need to do a part-time course in something, so I'm not going to progress as quickly as I want to because I need to learn something. Or it could be an exposure where I need visibility in this area. I don't know it well enough, so I'm going to need to take a sideways move, or in some cases I need to go down the level to get into that area to learn it, to then go back up. And I think when I say these things, it all makes sense, but the reality of it is emotionally people find that hard to do. And you have to take a much more holistic view of your career to say that, well, it won't be linear. It won't be just a straight line and up into the right. There will be plateaus. There may be troughs as well as peaks. And what you've got to be able to do is to plan out what you're trying to do in those three buckets and say, each move I make, is it going to increase my experience, my exposure in an area that I haven't had visibility in before, and then hence enhance my capability? Or is it something where I'm going to get some education and learn something, which will then, maybe it's a sideways move, but in the long run, I'm going to move up because I've now broadened my skills. If you look at most leaders today, people are not looking for people with very narrow capability. They're looking people for much broader understanding and experience. You know, if you work in an area if you're in sales, for instance, and you only know financial services, then it won't be just one aspect of that. You'll have to broaden out. You'd have to understand fintech, retail banking, investment banking. You'd have to understand the regulatory environment around that, because, you know, if you're to add value as a salesperson, as an example, then you'll need to understand the larger, more broader ecosystem rather than being very narrow in, say, retail banking or one area. And I think when you look at your careers, you should look at it in terms of that broadness. And if you remember what I was saying at the beginning about my children, 4 areas, you know, it's just to broaden their skills, to give them more capability, to give them more opportunity. And sometimes that means that those moves are sideways or down, but equally, they can also be up at the right time as well. And I think, you know, if you look at your career, it will be more of a windy road. And what you should never lose sight of during that journey is what your North Star is. And what people often do is they set a North Star, they start going, they hit a bump in the road and they think, oh, the direction's that way. But actually it's still there, but they're not prepared to take the windy, twisty road. They think, I'm going to keep going straight, so I need to find a way of continuing, or maybe my new North Star's there. But actually it's still where it was before. It just means that the road's not straight. It's going to be windy. And I think what I've kind of learned along the way around that is that successful leaders and those that have a successful career that is over a long period of time are those that are able to navigate the turns. And often people are not able to do this because they set their direction, it's a straight line, and when it's not going well, then they get lost or they lose focus. Whereas actually, if you understand that there are twists and turns, then you say, okay, well, maybe that's not what I was expecting, but actually I'm going to grow from that opportunity and it's going to fit into one of those 3 buckets. And then I'll use that to build on. And then maybe that I get back on course as to where I am. And I think that it's a mindset thing, because again, you know, people often have a plan and think that's it, and it's very linear, but you have to be able to navigate the turns. And what I've seen over my career is that successful leaders are ones that are able to say, yeah, there'll be twists and turns in the road, and they have the ability to change their mindset or their approach to ensure that whatever life throws at them, it's something they're going to learn from and grow from and use as a strength to take them forward.
I think this is very important. Sorry, Joy, before we start taking questions, Tunji, you've mentioned a lot of things, especially with regards to, you know, staying the path when you have your North Star. Now, let me see if I can phrase this question right. How do you know, or how are you convinced that your North Star is truly the place you should be heading to, is truly your North Star? How do you know? How do you have that conviction within you, first of all? Because sometimes you find people on a certain path and then they realize that they're not happy on this particular path, and probably they're on a trajectory to even leadership roles within the organization. And all of a sudden they realize, actually, I want to own my own business. I want to be in business. And that's a totally different path away from climbing up the corporate leadership role into, you know, so how do you know?
I think you have to stress test where you are. And, you know, when you set your North Star, there needs to be a level of conviction. And when I set mine, Roy, many years ago, I stress tested it over about a 7 or 8 month period with my coach. You know, I set it and then we tested it. And actually, then we realized actually it changed slightly. And then we were fine with that, because then we kept changing it until when we stress tested it and we, you know, she would question me and probe me over it. it didn't move. And then it was then looking about, this is going to be your North Star for at least the next 5 years. Do you see yourself on that path? And when we realized that, yes, it's unwavering, every time she asked different questions around it, it still stayed the same, then that's the path we took. And it does take a while. You don't just suddenly wake up and say, I'm going to go and do that. And then that's it. It can change. And again, this slide is a really good one, because sometimes your North Star may be changing, but it should change, not because the path looks difficult or it's changed from what you expected. It's because your mindset or your value system or your purpose has changed. And that for me is the key part, because often people's purposes and value systems, they don't change that much, Roy, during your lifetime. And when I look at me as a leader, when I do something called a strength finder, which I'm sure many have done, or there's different tools, my leadership style and my natural leadership style and the things that I value haven't changed that much and deviated. So you spend the time at the beginning to prepare where you think you want to go, test it, challenge it. And then, when it starts to become more consistent that you're coming to the same point around that purpose and values, then that's when you set your North Star.
Joy, before Joy starts asking questions, finally, before we leave this particular side, you mentioned a personal coach. So you stress tested with a personal coach. So that means we need to come to that realization that, sometimes we actually do need help from personal coaches.
Yeah, I will say to everybody on this call, there are 3 people that you will probably need in your career. You'll need a coach, you'll need a mentor, and you'll need a sponsor. Now, a mentor will talk with you, a coach will talk to you, and a sponsor will talk about you when you're not in the room. And you'll need all 3. And the trick is, know which tool you need, which part of the journey you're on. So when you're here, there'll be times when you need a coach, there'll be times when you need a mentor, and there'll be times when you need a sponsor. Now, the good news is that if you want a mentor or a coach, you can normally be able to find one. A sponsor's much harder, because you can't ask someone to sponsor you. What you have to do is you need to demonstrate in a consistent way that you're delivering value, and people then pick up on that and think, you know what, Roy's a really good guy, and they'll advocate for you when you're not in the room, or they'll look for opportunity for you. And I think that's the difference. People often mix them up, or they don't use them at the right time in the right way, or they use them too late. And I think that's one of the things I always say to a lot of people, is to understand which one of them you need. You'll need all 3, and get to understand where you are in your journey and which one's going to be useful. Sometimes you might need a mentor, sometimes you might need a coach, and often try and understand who your sponsors are, who are your fans, who are the people that are going to be your cheerleaders. There often will be some there, and sometimes you'll know who they are. Many of my sponsors, I don't know them, but I know they're there because, people will come and approach me and say, I've spoken to somebody about you and they've said you've done this, which is great. And I think that's a great thing. I don't ask them who the person is, because, they've probably seen what you do rather than what you say. And then they take an opinion or a point of view based on that. So, but the first 2, that coach and mentor is important. And coaches, especially for many of you on this call that might be, in middle management or in the middles of your careers, invest in it, because you do have to pay for it, but it's value that you'll get back. And often people don't want to invest in coaches because they're not necessarily that cheap, but they're worth every penny. I used my exec coach for about 7 or 8 years, and I paid every year out of my own pocket. Probably only maybe 1 or 2 of those years, my companies paid for it, but I was quite happy, and I got the return on investment from that, trifold, quadruple fold in terms of what I was given. My coach was very good. She was often able to act as a mentor when need be. And in fact, sometimes she almost acted as counsel. So, if you get a good one, and there are many good ones out there, and, I think it's an investment that any leader has to make.
Joy, please fire away.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. So we've got quite some interesting questions being posted. I think I'll start with Andy. Andy's posted 2 questions. So Andy, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Yeah, hi everyone. Brilliant models. I love the sponsor, coach, mentor model, and the career linearity thing. Someone once said to me that your career is crazy paving, not a railway road, right? And
Yep.
and I think that's exactly right. My first question was about leadership and the fact that a lot of leaders who appear from the outside to be succeeding are actually, you know, people just figure out where the crowd is going and walk in front of them, right? Which I think was, you know, Bishop of Norfolk or somebody else who said that. But something I've struggled with is giving bold direction, because I find the vast majority of people prefer comfort in falsehood than uncomfortable truth, and I wondered how you'd coped with that dynamic in your career.
It's a great question, Andy, and thank you. And you're right. And look, you often hear the saying that, you know, leadership can be lonely at times, and you have that choice whether you play to the crowd or whether you basically give that honest truth. And often the truth is not always that comfortable, and people naturally don't always like to give tough feedback or to make a decision that may not necessarily be that popular. But the one thing I have found, and how I've always dealt with it, is that I have to think, am I going to sleep well at night if I know that I know what is right, and I haven't done that because I felt that, well, you know, it might not be popular, or I'm not going to be liked over it. And I mean, most leaders, most people want to feel liked in their job, and they want their teams to like them and to be popular. But actually, the reality is that it's nice if people like me, but I want them to respect me. And I think that's the important part, is that you've got to be respected. And people can often turn around and say, I don't necessarily like some of the decisions he's made, or they're not ones that are popular with me, but I respect the fact that, you know, he's made a decision, he's made a call, and I understand in the communication what he's given, even if I'm not receiving that well. I'd rather take that all day long. And I probably find that when I have to give feedback, and I often have to, sometimes that can be quite tough, and you have to give very honest feedback to people sometimes that you know well, and you know, it's something, again, as a learned behavior, you get better as a leader as you get, I guess, more tenured. It becomes something you become more comfortable with, but it's never easy. But for me,
is that part of what you mean by North Star? I guess your North Star is about those values that you have for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. It goes back to values, and once they're set, you know, I know that for any team I lead anywhere, there'll be maybe 1 or 2 people that don't feel the way I lead. But I'm, you know, at the end of the day, as long as they respect the fact that I'm making decisions and.
Oh, I think Tunji is muted.
Oh yeah.
Tunji, you're muted.
Sorry. You muted yourself accidentally, I think. There.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how that
there
happened.
You go. No, you might.
I don't know how much of that you heard, actually, or did you get to the end of it?
Yeah, just about to the end. Yeah. Therefore, can I ask my second question? I mean, I've moved from pretty hardcore marketing, market research, strategy work, FMCG work into social venturing and charities and social innovation. And the move from that sort of market orthodoxy, where, you know, it's sort of like a twisted version of Darwinism, which is everything is about winning and it's about finding the best answer. And, you know, some people call it Death Star thinking, don't they? Where if you believe in the one truth and, you know, et cetera, to a world where actually the problems are highly complex and they're systemic problems, and nobody wins unless everybody does. And therefore, shifting or needing to shift people out of that competitive mindset, or organizations out of that competitive mindset into open, you know, collaboration, is something that I found really challenging. And you know, we can openly collaborate ourselves, but the other stakeholders aren't doing that, and so you end up falling down in the cracks in between. And I wondered if you had any sort of guidance on that particular issue.
I think it's a great question and a great point that you raise around the balance in terms of leadership, and depending on what industry you're in. And I think it's an interesting pivot going, from a real proper corporate sector into more the third sector, because the mindset does change, and I have to bring it back to your values and purpose. People make those decisions and the beliefs around that for obviously lots of different reasons, but it's a tricky one to be able to get everybody to collaborate, because naturally we'd like everybody to get on and do well, but the reality of life is that some people will get on and collaborate, there are others that don't. And I think you have to use your leadership and coaching depending on whether it's a team that you're taking on a journey or an individual within that. And what I've found over the years is that I'm always looking for teams to gel, and I look for ways in which you build a collaborative, inclusive environment. But on the other hand, I'm not afraid, if that isn't achieved, to remove those obstacles. And sometimes that means having difficult conversations with people, or letting people go. And I can remember, just on a very practical level, when I worked out with a team in Russia, and I went there for the first time. And when I got there, the leader there was, he ruled with an iron fist. It was awful, and the team weren't really happy, but didn't collaborate. And on my second visit to Moscow, I fired him, and I just took him out. And because it was the right thing to do. At the time, people around me were saying, "Whoa, you sure about that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm convinced." And I think over time, what I found was that the team changed. It did become more collaborative. The trust got built up. So, at the time, it didn't feel particularly popular or comfortable, but in the long term, it played out really well. And I think you've just got to be, bold in your conviction of doing that, but looking at where there are anomalies. And if you can't coach the person to play inside the tent, as I call it, then I think you have to have that difficult conversation. It may not be the right place for them.
So is this back to sort of operating in a values space where you're looking for shared values, and therefore it's important to communicate your own values very strongly and ask other people to share those, and if they don't, we move on?
We do. And what I found when I managed the Middle East, Africa and Russia team, when I shared my values, what I found, even though they were very disparate in terms of their beliefs and some of the things, there were 4 or 5 things that we could all agree on, that we were bound by.
Yeah.
And there were probably 1 or 2 things that I wouldn't necessarily naturally agree with, but I kind of said, well, they're not deal breakers, but we can corral around these 4 or 5 things that bind us together as a team. And that's what we did. And then we respected that 70% of what we did, we could collaborate and do things together, but there were 30% of things which were mainly local to those markets, which we might in the West or in the East or whatever disagree with, or it may not be our value system, but we got to a point where we accommodated that and said, fine, that's what's in that market. So that's kind of how I tended to work.
Thank you, Andy, for the questions. I'm just conscious of time. Tunji, so can you tell us, because we need to start wrapping up, about your experience? When I say your experience, the things that you've learned so far, what advice would you give to us on this call? So
I'll give a bit, actually. And these are probably the lessons I have learned. And here's one I prepared early, as they say. The first one, which is probably, again, obvious, but it's something that I've seen play out throughout my career: IQ versus EQ. So, your ability to do the job and your intelligence in that job versus your emotional intelligence. There comes a point where your ability to do the role and your IQ is less relevant as a leader, and it becomes much more, the pendulum swings much more towards your emotional intelligence and how you are able to, read a room, read individuals, read teams, and you're able to do that better. And often people confuse the fact that if they're really good at their role technically, then they should be in the next position and they should be the manager or the leader. That just doesn't work. And there's a great book out there, I'm sure many of you have read, which is What Got You Here Won't Get You There, by I think it's Marshall Goldsmith, which really talks about that balance of how a leader needs to move over. And I've certainly changed my sway as a leader much more around the EQ part over the years, and that's served me well. And I think even if you're not a leader and you're just an individual contributor or someone within their own business or elsewhere, this holds true around the fact that, you know, emotional intelligence becomes much more important as you start to move through your career or through your positions. This is a saying that came from one of my old leaders at Cisco, Chris Dedicoat, and he was president of EMEA for Cisco a few years ago, and he had this saying, which I totally believe in, which is knowledge, confidence, and risk. And the belief here is that if you have knowledge, that's just not academic, it's knowledge you pick up from learning generally. Knowledge gives you confidence. And if you have confidence, it gives you the ability to take risk. And risk often is the differentiator between people that are good and those that are great. And if you look at any leaders, those that are great have often taken risks, but they're based on the backs of being confident and having knowledge in that area to do that. So when people want to really make that step change and be different, then, you know, I think that these things really do play out well in giving you those tenets to be able to do it. Networking is probably something that you've heard so many times, but I'm going to tell people here on the call, network isn't just about how many LinkedIn connections you have. It's about working your network. And I work my network. So I connect with people. I find out where there's mutual things that we can connect on. But then I also use that network to help bring others in. And I think that's really, for me, a really important part. Because if you grow your network and then you help others in it, then it's a true network that actually works. And if someone's looking for an opportunity, then if you know somebody in that area, then you can connect them up and make sure that they're able to, you know, to make that connection and help them. So I use my network for good. And if I don't feel people are able to contribute into that, then, you know, I probe a bit more to find out what value they're going to be. Because once you're in, it's an active network, which I really try and ensure that continues to grow. We've talked about education, experience and exposure, so I won't go over those again. But again, I think always look at your career moves in what it's going to give you in these lenses. And again, if you're able to do that, it's a good way of focusing what those career decisions may well be or your leadership journey is. Self-awareness is an interesting one. And I think one that often we get probably 360-degree feedback, and that gives you one lens through it. But you know, I found out that even as a leader, and I thought I was a relatively good leader, I still had blind spots. And for me, that played out in a probably quite a spectacular way many years ago when I missed out on a promotion, and I wasn't particularly happy about it. And I don't get very angry and I don't get very animated and bang the stick when I'm not happy. I often express my anger through wit and sarcasm, which is not always the best thing, but that's just the way I deal with it. And I remember my boss telling me you hadn't got the role, and I got the feedback, which was that I was too polished and too perfect. And I thought that's not really helpful for me. And I was raging inside, and I think the wit and the sarcasm came out. And I said, oh, you know what? It'd be really interesting if I could go onto our learning platform and you know what, I'm struggling. I can't find any unpolishing courses. Can you show me where they are? And he realized I wasn't too happy. But one of my colleagues actually knew I was not happy and actually paid for me to go on a self-awareness course in the US. And it was with the Grinnell leadership team. And it was quite interesting. I won't steal the thunder because if anyone ever goes on it, it's a brilliant course to do. And I've recommended it to others who have done it. But when I came back from that course, I realized I had a couple of blind spots. It's quite comprehensive. You have to get a lot of feedback. And it's not just from your teams, it's from people you used to work with, it's from family members, it's your wife or your partner, it's your siblings. So it's really comprehensive, and they have to give very honest feedback, and you have to give the context around why you want the feedback. So you want them to be honest, not nice, but honest. And they use that to build out you know, where the blind spots are. And when you get them played back to you, it was quite powerful. And for me, you know, it was a real opportunity to go back to my teams to say, I now see where some of these blind spots are. And we had a very emotional conversation around it, but it made me a better leader. So certainly self-awareness is one to always check in and make sure, how are you showing up? You might think you're a good leader, and you probably are, I'm quite competent, but make sure you know how you're showing up, because it sometimes isn't always necessarily aligned. Differentiation, and this probably goes back to North Stars, and it goes back to who you are, your values, your purpose. Take time to understand how you want to differentiate yourself, and think about what you stand for. You should be able to go up an elevator, and if someone asks you, you know, who are you? You know, you should be able to say what you stand for and who you are as a person. And I, you know, have taken more focus on my brand over the years of what I want to stand for and the authenticity I want. As you see me now is how my team see me at work, is how I am at home. I'm no different. And I don't wear a mask when I go to work to be some other type of leader. You know, I've really worked to understand what my brand is, how authentic I want to be, and what differentiation I bring. And again, you can use brand consultants at times if you really need to, but some of it you can do certainly with a good coach. And one thing I have learned along the way is that there'll always be unconscious bias, and we all have it. Doesn't matter what color you are, what background you have. My take on that is I assume everybody I meet, even if it's somebody from Nigeria that's like me, there will be a bias. And what I try and work on is the fact that when I had that conversation, I'm looking to have an exchange with somebody that will kind of dispel those myths. So if you always assume that people you meet, there will be some bias they'll have. Oh, he's Nigerian, they might have a view on that, or you're black, they might have a view on that. I just ensure that any exchange I have is a positive one that may dispel any myths, or it may mean it's a more positive outcome than what they thought. And I take that with me as an assumption, because it's one that's probably served me quite well. And probably last but not least, disrupt yourself rather than be disrupted. You know, often we can get into situations because we've allowed that situation to happen, whether it's at work or whatever. I've always changed, and you know, a very simple thing to finish on, I know we're running out of time, is that when you go through any life cycle in your role or in your career, certainly in a role, there will be a time of discovery, there'll be a time of competency in the role, there'll then be a time of mastery in that role. When you are at the mastery stage in your role with whatever you're doing, that is the time to disrupt again. Because if you do not disrupt, mastery then becomes complacency. You get comfortable, and then you won't have the will or the motivation to then find out what that next thing is that you're looking for. So I've always disrupted myself. When I feel that I'm getting comfortable or I've mastered something, I'll do something different or find something else to do. And I think that's something that you can take both in your career and probably in your life generally.
Tunji, if it's okay with you and with the audience, this is because I'm aware of the next few slides and very important key lessons that can be learned. If it's okay, maybe we'll spend an extra 10 minutes, if it's okay with you and also with the audience. I know you have another meeting that you need to shoot off to.
I do, but I can probably just I can probably stop here, to be honest, Roy. I mean, okay. It's fine. We can probably cover it another time, the other parts of it, but because there's quite a bit, and
there's quite a bit, and I was hoping we'll be able to get through with it. I think maybe what we can do is we can end, you know, with the last segment, which is, you know, what's your final take? What final advice would you give to people? And maybe we can use the slide with your second to the last slide and just wrap up with that.
Ooh, you're probably getting me there. Is it that one or that one? That one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one.
The 11th one. Yeah.
So it is a slide I kind of use quite a bit, but I think it's one for me as a leader is around impact. And you know, this is not a view of whether, you know, what your view is on Elon Musk as a leader or as a person, but I think that, you know, when you look at your career as a leader, and I always say to people that we come into this world and we will leave it. We do want to make sure that when we're leading it as a leader, that you have an impact and a legacy, and that you made a difference, and hopefully in a positive way. And I think as a leader, I think that I love this saying because it's a question I often ask leaders, and you know, the facts are there for what happened in that 1 week in 2016. But you know, I always ask people, what did you do? You know, what did you do as a leader? What have you done differently? What's your legacy that you're going to be able to leave behind? And if you're struggling to think, what have you done so far? Then it's an opportunity to maybe look at your values, maybe get a coach or someone to help you to really define where you want. You know, someone like Elon Musk, he's a serial entrepreneur. He's done lots of different things, but he knows what he wants to do. He's quite driven, and you know, he's quite focused. And I think that, you know, as a leader, you have to be focused. And I think that you've got to take the time and invest in that time. And this is a man that disrupts a lot of things he does. And I think that, you know, as leaders, we have to challenge ourselves to continue to disrupt. And I think if we're able to do that, then I honestly, genuinely believe that you will find fulfillment in what you're doing. You won't be complacent. You certainly won't be bored in what you do, and you'll grow. And hopefully, you know, when you leave this place, whenever that will be, you've left a print that's positive and something that others can grow and continue with.
Thank you very much, Tunji. I think this has been very exciting. I have learned a lot. Certainly, one area that I'm going to start focusing on is stress testing my North Star. I think that's very key, and I think that's very important for anyone who wants to be a leader in an organization. Is it the right thing for you to do? And if it's the right thing for you to do, then you need to take into account your environment. You need to take into account the elements that are available to you, your personal coach or coach, a mentor, and a sponsor. And I think these are very important points that we all should take into consideration as we ascend into leadership roles. Thank you very much, Tunji. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's talk. I know it would have been exciting to go through most of the remaining slides because exciting talk ahead. However, I think this calls for a part 2 version, Tunji, 2022. So part 2 in 2022. Probably we will focus on other things, but also, you know, we would also highlight the remaining sections that haven't been touched at all. Because I think, you know, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the presentation which you've graciously prepared and presented to us today. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, co-host Joy, and to everyone who has made the time to attend. Thank you very much. Our next talk, as we progress into 2022, will be smashing that glass ceiling and concrete wall in 2022. And we would have a special guest, Carmen Morris, who happens to be an ex-Forbes contributor as well. So Carmen Morris, you can check her up and just Google her and you would find her name. So as we progress into 2022, it will be good to summarize a lot of the things that we've heard on this leadership program so far. You've heard a lot from Tunji today. I believe most of us will leave here and start stress testing our North Star and where we want to be in 2022. So thank you, everyone. This has been a really exciting session. Tunji, we definitely need a part 2. Thank you for spending the time to come here. I believe this has been very helpful to a lot of people. So thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Good evening, and thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you, Tunji.